All right, let's get ready for another deep dive. We're heading courtside for the NBA's final stretch. It's crunch time, folks. Playoff races, they're heating up. Injuries, shaking things up, as always. Oh, and did I mention the ownership drama brewing? Yeah, it's getting juicy.
Sounds like we've got a lot to unpack.
We do. We're digging into an ESPN article called NBA Midseason Report.
Nice.
Packed with insights from executives and scouts around the league.
Always love hearing what those guys are thinking.
Me too. And let me tell you, some of these opinions, they're going to raise some eyebrows.
Yeah, wait to hear them.
We got to start with the elephant in the room. Or should I say, the Maverick in LA.
Ah, yes, the Luka Dončić trade.
The Luka-LeBron pairing. I mean, Dončić was a force in Dallas, no doubt.
Absolutely.
But now the big question is, how is he going to fit in with LeBron? That's what has everybody buzzing.
It's been a bumpy road so far, for sure. You got to remember, Dončić is coming off that calf injury. Yeah. And as one executive pointed out, there's always an adjustment period when you start playing alongside LeBron.
Makes sense.
He commands so much attention on the court.
Oh, yeah.
Forces everyone else to adapt their game.
And from what I'm seeing, the Lakers roster, well, it might not be built for that kind of adaptation.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
I mean, the lack of outside shooting is a huge issue, right?
Absolutely, huge.
And then you've got Jackson Hayes as your only real lob threat. Come on, I'm not an NBA executive or anything, but even I can see that's a problem.
It definitely limits their options on offense.
Yeah.
You need that spacing in today's NBA.
Yeah.
You got to have those consistent shooters to keep the defense honest.
Totally.
Otherwise, it's way too easy to just double team LeBron and Dončić.
Exactly. Think about those teams like the Warriors, the Celtics. They've been so successful because they have multiple threats from beyond the arc.
For sure. It's all about spreading the floor.
But the Lakers, they just don't have that right now. So is this Dončić trade a bust already? Or are they just, working through some growing pains? What do you think?
I think it's too early to write it off as a bust completely. But there's definitely some reason to be worried. There's this one West executive quoted in the article, thinks the Lakers' roster flaws are just too big to overcome this season, even with Dončić's talent. But then again, can you ever really count out a team with LeBron James?
Never.
He's made a career out of defying expectations, so who knows, right?
It's going to be interesting to see how they adjust in these last few weeks.
Absolutely.
Speaking of defying expectations, the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Oh, yeah, they've been impressive.
They're quietly sitting at the top of the East.
Quietly dominating.
Right. And this article actually suggests they might be a real threat to the Celtics. I mean, wow, is this finally the Cavs' year?
There's a lot of excitement around them, and it's definitely warranted.
Sure.
Talented young core, remarkably consistent, and that trade for DeAndre Hunter. Genius.
Smart move.
Gives them another weapon on defense, someone to throw at Tatum and Brown. Which, let's face it, that's crucial if they want to take down the Celtics in the playoffs.
Absolutely crucial. One scout even said Hunter could be the key to unlocking their championship potential.
Interesting.
But hold on, because another scout in this article, they're not so convinced. They're saying the Cavs just don't have the experience to go up against a team like the Celtics. That's the classic battle, youth versus experience.
It's a great debate. Tough one to call.
Right. So where do you fall on this?
I think I'm leaning toward experience in this case. The Celtics have been there, done that. They know how to win a championship.
Yeah.
And they have Brad Stevens, a coach who's proven he can adapt when it matters most.
For sure.
But don't get me wrong, the Cavs, they're hungry. They're playing with a ton of confidence. I wouldn't be shocked at all if they push Boston to the limit.
It's going to be a battle. All right, everybody, buckle up, because the East is shaping up to be an absolute war zone. Now, let's shift gears and head over to the West, where things have gotten even crazier. Victor Wembanyama's injury. Season ending.
Oh, man. That's a heartbreaker. Tough blow for the kid, obviously. But it also throws a wrench into the playoff picture.
Yeah.
The West was already a tight race, and now it's even more chaotic.
11 teams battling for 10 spots.
Exactly.
And those last few spots are up for grabs, with the Mavericks, Warriors, Kings, and Suns all fighting to get in.
It's a dogfight.
It is. And get this, one executive predicts the Suns, with all their star power, they're going to miss the playoffs entirely. They even went as far as to say the players seem to dislike each other. I know, right? If that's true, that's a massive red flag, because talent alone can only take you so far,
Absolutely. You need that chemistry,
that
camaraderie, especially in the playoffs. Think about those Spurs teams back in their dynasty days.
Right.
They weren't always the most talented team on paper,
Right.
but they were so cohesive.
Yeah.
And that made all the difference.
The Spurs are a perfect example. Okay, so while I'm still trying to wrap my head around the Suns potentially missing the playoffs, it's clear that locker room issues, they can make or break a team.
No doubt about it.
And speaking of teams with high expectations that are falling short, the Suns and the 76ers.
Yeah, two teams that came into the season with championship aspirations, but it just hasn't clicked for either of them.
It hasn't. The article is pretty blunt about it. They say there's little faith in either team making a deep playoff run this year.
Ouch.
I know. And honestly, I get it. The Suns, even with Kevin Durant, they just haven't gelled the way everyone thought they would.
Right.
And one executive even said, they're much worse than anyone could have possibly imagined.
Damn. Harsh, but maybe true.
As for the Sixers, they're still relying so heavily on Embiid.
Yeah.
When he's not at his best, their offense struggles.
The lack of depth is definitely a concern for both teams. They're top-heavy, relying on a couple of stars to carry the load, and that's just not sustainable in the playoffs. You need contributions from the entire roster, especially in those long, grueling 7-game series.
Totally agree. But there is a little bit of hope for the Sixers, at least in the long run. The article mentions they have some promising young players and could potentially go with that two timelines approach.
The two timelines approach.
Yeah.
Classic strategy. Essentially, you're trying to balance winning now with building for the future.
Right.
You have your veterans who are competing for a championship in the present.
Yep.
But at the same time, you're developing your younger players who will be ready to take over in a few years.
It's a tough balance to strike.
It is, but it can work if you do it right. Think about the Warriors. They drafted Draymond Green and Klay Thompson while Steph Curry was still developing, and that laid the foundation for their dynasty.
That's a great point. So while this season might be a wash for the Sixers, they do have the pieces in place to be contenders for years to come.
Potentially.
Unfortunately, the same can't really be said for the Suns. They seem stuck in win-now mode without the depth or apparently the chemistry to make it happen. It'll be interesting to see how both teams navigate these next few months.
Absolutely. Now, while the Thunder and Nuggets are considered the front runners in the West, there are a couple of young, up-and-coming teams that could potentially shake things up.
Oh, you mean like the Grizzlies and the Rockets?
Exactly.
I love watching those teams play. The Grizzlies have John Morant, who's just electrifying, and their offense is unlike anything we've ever seen before.
It's truly unique. The article even pointed out that they don't really rely on traditional pick and rolls with Morant, which is pretty rare in today's NBA.
It is. It's a testament to their coaching staff and the talent of their players. They've figured out a way to be successful by playing to their strengths, and they're not afraid to challenge conventional wisdom.
Exactly.
But the article also questions whether that style can translate to playoff success.
That's the big question. The playoffs are a different animal.
For sure.
Teams have more time to scout, to prepare for their opponents. It'll be interesting to see if Memphis can adapt. You know, can they maintain that offensive efficiency when the stakes are higher?
Good point. So maybe they're not quite ready for a deep playoff run just yet, but they're definitely a team to watch. What about the Rockets? They're young, they're still figuring things out, but they've had some really impressive moments this season.
The Rockets are intriguing because they have so much raw talent, but they're lacking that playoff experience that's so crucial in this league. One scout in the article even said that he wants to see how they perform in a playoff environment before he considers them true contenders.
Makes sense. The playoffs, they test you in ways the regular season just can't.
Exactly. They expose weaknesses, they test your mental toughness, they demand a different level of execution.
So both the Grizzlies and the Rockets are teams to watch, but maybe not quite ready for prime time just yet. It makes you wonder, with so many contenders battling injuries this year, are there any other teams lurking in the shadows waiting to pounce on this opportunity? Could a dark horse emerge from the East?
That's a great question. And actually, the article does highlight a couple of teams that could potentially challenge the Celtics and Cavaliers, the Bucks and the Knicks.
The Knicks? Really?
Yeah, they've been surprisingly good.
I'll admit, I haven't been paying much attention to them this season. What's working for them?
They've built a really solid system around Jalen Brunson.
Oh, yeah, he's been great for them.
He has. They're playing balanced offense, tough defense, and they've got Thibodeau, a coach who demands accountability and effort.
Yeah, he's known for that.
One executive in the article even praised their cohesion, which he contrasted with the Bucks, who are very reliant on Giannis.
Interesting. So you're saying the Knicks are a more complete team than the Bucks?
I wouldn't say better, necessarily. It's more about recognizing the different approaches to team building and how they translate to playoff success.
I see what you mean.
The Bucks have that ultimate trump card in Giannis.
He's a force of nature.
He is.
Yeah.
But their reliance on him can also be a weakness. If he has an off night, if a team figures out how to neutralize him, they don't have as many reliable options to turn to.
Good point.
The Knicks, on the other hand, they have a more balanced attack, a system that doesn't hinge on one superstar.
So it's like the classic debate, individual brilliance versus team synergy.
Exactly. And both approaches have their merits. It'll be fascinating to see how they play out in the playoffs.
No doubt about it. Now, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier. Injuries. This has been a brutal season on that front.
It really has.
And the ripple effects are felt across the entire league.
That's the thing about injuries, They impact everything. We talked about Wembanyama's injury. Obviously, it affects his own development. But it also potentially changes the Rookie of the Year race. Could even impact contract negotiations for other players down the line.
It's like a domino effect, isn't it? One injury can set off this chain reaction that affects everything. Award races, playoff seeding, team finances, you name it.
Yep.
And speaking of finances, this article dives into the potential implications of All-NBA selections for some of these young players. Guys like Evan Mobley, Kate Cunningham, Scotty Barnes, Trae Young. They could be looking at some massive contract extensions if they make an All-NBA team this year.
Yeah, the All-NBA teams, they're not just about bragging rights. Those selections can trigger clauses in their contracts that lead to some serious raises.
So it's not just about individual accolades, it's about securing the bag.
Exactly.
I can only imagine the pressure these young guys are feeling, trying to lead their teams to success, while also knowing that their individual performance could have a huge impact on their future earnings.
It's a lot to handle, especially for players who are still so early in their careers. But it also highlights the business side of the NBA, Individual performance and financial rewards are often intertwined.
That's a great point. It reminds us that these players, they're not just athletes, they're businessmen.
For sure.
Negotiating contracts, building their brands. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Superstar trades, playoff contenders, the financial side of the league. But I want to go back to something that really intrigued me in this article. The Oklahoma City Thunder's Twin Towers experiment.
Oh, yeah. The Thunder have been one of the most surprising teams this season, quietly putting together a really solid year.
They have.
And their willingness to experiment with different lineups has been a big part of their success.
Right. They're defying conventional wisdom by playing Chet Holmgren and Isaiah Hartenstein together. A lot of people thought that wouldn't work in today's NBA.
It's a throwback to a different era, when dominant big men ruled the paint.
Totally. But in today's game, with all the emphasis on spacing and three-point shooting, can a two-big lineup actually thrive?
The article suggests it all comes down to how well Chet Holmgren can shoot the ball. If he can stretch the floor with his outside shooting, it opens up a lot of possibilities for their offense.
Makes sense.
He becomes a real matchup nightmare for opposing teams.
I can see that.
Too big for smaller defenders to guard on the perimeter, and too skilled for traditional centers to handle in the post.
It's a fascinating experiment. And it really speaks to the Thunder's commitment to player development.
Absolutely.
They're not afraid to try unconventional things and see what sticks. Speaking of teams exceeding expectations, let's talk about the Denver Nuggets.
The Nuggets. A model of consistency, led by that dynamic duo, Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic.
Their offense is a thing of beauty. Fluid ball movement, precise passing, scoring from everywhere on the court. It's a real testament to the power of chemistry and a well-defined system.
They're the antithesis of that isolation-heavy hero ball style that we see so much of in the NBA today.
Right, and yet they're incredibly effective.
Proving that you don't need a roster full of superstars to be successful.
You just need to have players who understand their roles and play together as a unit.
Exactly.
The Nuggets, they haven't made any major splashes in free agency or trades.
Yep.
But they've built a contender through smart drafting, player development, and a coaching staff that knows how to maximize their talent.
It's a blueprint for sustainable success in a league that often prioritizes short-term gains.
It really is. But even with their well-oiled machine humming along, the Nuggets still have some decisions to make, particularly when it comes to their starting lineup.
Yes. The big debate. Who starts alongside Murray and Jokic?
The article highlights the options. Christian Braun, the young up-and-comer, versus Russell Westbrook, the veteran.
It's a tough choice.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just about basketball.
Right.
Westbrook is a future Hall of Famer, but he's also known for being, well, let's say, strong-willed.
He likes to have the ball in his hands.
Exactly. And integrating him into a system that already has two ball-dominant stars, that's a real challenge.
Could disrupt the chemistry that's been so crucial to their success.
Exactly.
There's this one executive quoted in the article thinks the Nuggets should start Westbrook even if it's not the best basketball decision.
Interesting.
Just to avoid alienating him.
Wow. That's a bold strategy.
It is. And it kind of suggests that sometimes managing personalities and egos is just as important as optimizing your lineups.
It's a delicate balance, for sure. It speaks to the human element of coaching. You're not just dealing with X's and O's. You're dealing with people with their own aspirations, insecurities, sensitivities.
It's a good reminder that the NBA is as much about psychology as it is about athleticism.
Couldn't agree more.
And speaking of the human element, I want to shift our focus to something that often gets overlooked in the world of professional sports. Ownership changes. The Celtics and the Timberwolves are both franchises at a crossroads right now.
They are.
And the decisions made by their new owners, well, they could have a huge impact on these teams.
Ownership changes can be pivotal moments in a franchise's history.
Mm-hmm.
New owners, they bring their own vision, priorities, financial resources. It can dramatically alter the team's trajectory.
It's like a whole new chapter is beginning for these teams and their fans.
Exactly. And these transitions also highlight the business side of the NBA. It's easy to get caught up in the drama on the court, but the reality is these franchises are businesses.
Right.
And their financial health has a massive impact on their ability to compete.
That's something this article really drives home. The Celtics' sale price could influence future expansion plans for the whole league.
Huge implications.
And then you've got the Timberwolves' new owners, who are going to have to make some tough decisions about payroll and their roster.
Lots of tough choices ahead.
It's high stakes, not just for those teams, but for the NBA as a whole.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that the decisions made in the boardroom can have just as much impact as the plays made on the court.
Couldn't have said it better myself. All right, we've covered a lot of ground here. Superstar trades, rising stars, playoff contenders, the business side of the NBA. I'm curious, what stands out to you as the most surprising or thought-provoking takeaway from this deep dive?
You know, for me, it's the sheer unpredictability of this season. We've seen so many key players go down with injuries.
Yeah.
It's created this landscape where a dark horse team could absolutely make a deep playoff run.
That's what makes it so exciting. And on that note, I want to leave you with this. With so much talent sidelined, is this the year a dark horse team shocks the world? What do you think?
It's a question worth pondering. We're seeing so much parity in the league right now.
Mm-hmm.
The talent gap between the top teams and those middle-of-the-pack teams, it's not as wide as it used to be.
So you're saying the door is open for a team to come out of nowhere and make a run?
Absolutely. All it takes is a hot streak at the right time, a few lucky bounces, and the belief that they can compete with anyone.
I love it. This deep dive has got me fired up for the rest of the season. Anything can happen, and that's what keeps us coming back for more.
Exactly.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. Be sure to tune in next time for another deep dive into a topic that's sure to pique your curiosity.
See you then. It's really impressive, you know?
Yeah.
They've really bought into Thibodeau's system. They're playing with this real sense of purpose. It's a pretty stark contrast to the Bucks, who just seem to live and die by Giannis's heroics.
So are you saying the Knicks are a more complete team than the Bucks? That's a bold statement.
I wouldn't necessarily say one is better than the other. It's more about recognizing that there are different ways to build a team, you know?
Right.
And how those approaches translate to playoff success. The Bucks, they have the ultimate weapon in Giannis.
No doubt.
But that reliance on him, it can also be a weakness. Like if he's having an off night or if a team figures out how to shut him down, they don't have as many other options to turn to. The Knicks, they have a more balanced attack, a system that doesn't completely depend on one superstar.
I see your point. It's like that classic debate, individual brilliance versus team synergy. Both approaches have their pros and cons. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out in the playoffs. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, I want to go back to something we were talking about earlier. The impact of injuries. It's been a brutal season for those, and the ripple effects are felt everywhere.
It's crazy, right? The number of star players who have missed significant time this year is insane. And like we were saying before, Wembanyama's injury, it's not just about him missing out on his rookie season. It could change who wins Rookie of the Year, even as affect how much money other guys get in their contracts.
It's a wild domino effect. One injury can set off this chain reaction that impacts everything. Award races, playoff seeding, team finances, you name it. And speaking of finances, this article talks about how All-NBA selections could affect some of these young guys' contracts.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's not just about the prestige. Making an All-NBA team can mean a huge payday.
Big time.
Guys like Mobley, Cunningham, Barnes, Trae Young, if they make an All-NBA team, they could be looking at massive contract extensions.
It's not just about the accolades, it's about getting that bag. I bet these young guys are feeling the pressure. Not only do they want to win games, but their individual performance could determine how much money they make in the future.
It's a lot to handle, no doubt, especially when you're still so young in your career. But it also shows you the business side of the NBA, right? How individual performance is tied to financial rewards. These guys aren't just athletes, they're businessmen, negotiating contracts, building their brands.
That's a great point. They got to think about all that stuff. All right, so we've covered a lot. Superstar trades, playoff contenders, the financial side of things. But I want to go back to something that I found really interesting in this article. The Oklahoma City Thunder's Twin Towers experiment.
Ah, yes. The Thunder. They've been quietly exceeding expectations this season.
They have, and their willingness to try different lineups has been a big part of that.
For sure. It shows a real commitment to figuring out what works best.
They're playing Chet Holmgren and Isaiah Hartenstein together, which a lot of people thought wouldn't work in today's NBA.
It is kind of going against the grain, right? It's like a throwback to a different era of basketball, back when you had those dominant big men clogging up the paint. But in today's game, where it's all about spacing and three-point shooting, can two big guys really thrive?
That's the question, isn't it?
The article seems to think it all hinges on Chet Holmgren's shooting ability. If he can consistently hit those outside shots, it opens up so many options for the Thunder.
It would make their offense really difficult to defend.
He'd become a total matchup nightmare. Too big for smaller guys to guard on the perimeter, too skilled for traditional centers to handle in the post.
So it's a pretty fascinating experiment. It shows how the Thunder are committed to developing their players and finding creative solutions. Speaking of teams exceeding expectations, what about the Denver Nuggets?
The Nuggets are just a machine, aren't they? Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic, they just work so well together. Their offense is so smooth, with all that ball movement, those crisp passes scoring from all over the court. It's a testament to chemistry and a well-designed system.
They're like the opposite of that isolation-heavy style that's so common in the league these days.
Right.
And yet they're so effective, it shows you don't necessarily need a team full of superstars to be successful.
You just need the right pieces fitting together.
Exactly. They've built a contender through smart drafting, good player development, and a coaching staff that knows how to use their talent. They're a model for how to build sustained success in a league that's often so focused on the short term.
No doubt about it. They've really built something special there.
But they still have some choices to make, particularly with their starting lineup. The article talks about who should start alongside Murray and Jokic, Christian Braun or Russell Westbrook.
Yeah, that's a tough one. And it's not just about basketball, right? You've got the young, promising Braun, and then you've got Westbrook, a future Hall of Famer, who's also known for, well, wanting things his way.
He's a strong personality.
To say the least. It's a challenge to integrate a guy like him into a system that already has two ball-dominant stars. You don't want to mess with the chemistry that's made them so successful.
There's a risk of upsetting the balance.
Exactly. And the article actually quotes one executive who thinks the Nuggets should start Westbrook, even if it's not the best basketball decision.
Really?
Yeah, just to keep him happy.
So sometimes managing egos is just as important as making the right basketball decisions.
Sometimes you got to play the psychology game as much as the X's and O's.
It's a reminder that coaching is about more than just the game itself. You're dealing with people, with all their complexities. All right, I want to shift gears a bit and talk about something that often gets overlooked. Ownership changes. The Celtics and the Timberwolves, they're both at turning points. And the decisions made by their new owners could have huge consequences.
Oh, absolutely. Ownership changes can completely reshape a franchise. New owners bring their own ideas, their own priorities, their own money. It can really change the direction of a team.
It's like a fresh start, a new chapter for these organizations and their fans.
And it highlights the business side of the NBA. It's easy to get caught up in the on-court action, but at the end of the day, these are businesses.
Right.
And their financial health plays a big role in their ability to compete.
The article makes that really clear. The price the Celtics sell for could actually affect the league's expansion plans down the road. And the Timberwolves' new owners will have some tough decisions to make about their payroll and their roster. It's high-stakes stuff, not just for those teams, but for the whole league.
It's all connected, and it reminds us that what happens in the boardroom can be just as important as what happens on the court.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. So much of what happens in the NBA is driven by factors that go beyond the game itself. It's a reminder that it's not just about the players, it's about the whole ecosystem.
It really is. And these ownership transitions also kind of highlight that business side of the NBA. You know, it's easy to get caught up in all the on-court drama, but these franchises, they're businesses and their financial health. Well, that has a huge impact on whether they can really compete or not.
Yeah, this article really emphasizes that point. Like, the Celtics sale price, that could actually influence the league's future expansion plans, you know? And for the Timberwolves as new owners, they've got some big decisions to make. Payroll, the roster.
Lots of tough choices ahead.
It's high stakes, not just for those teams, but for the whole NBA, really.
Absolutely. It's a good reminder that those decisions made in the boardroom, they could be just as important as what happens out there on the court.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Superstar trades, rising stars, playoff contenders, the business side of things. I'm curious, what's been the most surprising or thought-provoking thing for you in this deep dive?
You know, it's the unpredictability of this season that really stands out to me. We've seen so many injuries to key players, right? It's created this situation where any team could make a run, really. You know, a dark horse could absolutely come out of nowhere and make a deep playoff run. Yeah. It's a good reminder that in the NBA, anything can happen.
That's what makes it so exciting. And with that in mind, I want to leave everyone with this question. With all these injuries to big-name players, could this be the year a dark horse team really shocks the world?
It's definitely a question worth thinking about. You know, the league is pretty balanced right now. That talent gap between the top teams and those middle-of-the-pack teams, well, it's not as wide as it used to be.
So you're saying there's a chance for a team to come out of nowhere and make a real run?
Absolutely. All it takes is a hot streak at the right time, maybe a few lucky bounces, and a belief that they can beat anybody.
I love it. This deep dive has me pumped for the rest of the season. Anything can happen, and that's what keeps us coming back for more.
Exactly.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. Be sure to tune in next time for another deep dive. We'll be tackling a new topic that's sure to keep you on the edge of your seat.